when I first started out at Fender, from the reps and dealers, I would hear all the time about, PV this and PV that, PV this. And one of my first meetings there, it was like I was in a room, and I at one point, I'm there for like a month, and I'm this like New Yorker amongst all these Californians in Arizona, and I finally just said, enough with PV, enough. I said, we're Fender, goddammit.
Oh my back.
Hey there, I'm Dan, the self-proclaimed Lonely Rocker. Welcome to this episode of The Journal, the place where I rant or enlighten on topics related to the creation of music. This is part 2 of my interview with Ritchie Fliegler. If you missed part 1, the link to that part is in the description. Now, at the end of part 1, we found Ritchie at Marshall. Imagine working for Jim Marshall, and now you're working at Fender during the era of the one and only Bill Shultz. What an amazing time to be part of instrument manufacturing. Now, he worked for 2 iconic brands, talks about his time at Fender, but also compares the 2 companies, lets us know some things that were similar and some things that were very different. All right, let's jump in and check out part 2 of my interview with Ritchie Fliegler. Fast forward, and after all those years of trying to compete with Fender, now you find yourself at Fender. I mean, these are 2 legendary brands, and obviously from a business perspective, I know this is a different conversation, but now you've been inside both of these companies. Is there something that you can say that was very similar about these 2 businesses?
Yeah. They were both run during my time, for the most part, by geniuses, right? And that's a real word that has a real meaning, and I'm using it the way it's meant to be used. Jim Marshall, Bill Shultz. Bill Shultz was the greatest man I ever met, and for whatever reason, he really, really liked me. He gave me lessons that I don't even know how to. I don't even know. I'm stuttering trying to figure out how to even talk about them, but I love that man like to no end, and I miss him greatly. So the common thread was Bill and Jim. And that thread was, and this is where it's kind of different. That thread was make shit that works, that people can afford, and they will buy it. And it was really, I know that sounds oversimplified, but it's really not. It's not, simple doesn't mean easy. Give people value. Make an instrument that people want to play. Make something that's compelling. Make it sound good. And make it available. And if you do that, all the other things that people worry about, all the marketing hoo-ha that seems to be, in many cases, more important, goes away. When I first started out at Fender, from the reps and dealers, I would hear all the time about, PV this and PV that, PV this. And one of my first meetings there, it was like I was in a room, and I at one point, I'm there for like a month, and I'm this like New Yorker amongst all these Californians in Arizona, and I finally just said, enough with fucking PV, enough. I said, we're Fender, goddammit, and then I said, we're Gumby, damn it. Nobody got the joke, but I said, why are we talking about PV? PV should be, they should wake up every morning and wish us dead. Why are we worried about them? Well, they have the dealer network and that. Fuck them. Let's kill them. Right?
I hated PV amps, by the way, back in the day.
It's like, so, Bill takes me aside afterward and says, okay, so what are you going to do about it? I was like, I'll take care of it, Chief. I'll make it happen, right? So one of the first things we did, at the time we had these, the Blues series amps, which were conceived by some very good friends, and I'm not here to knock them, but they just couldn't compete with what people wanted. There were people at Fender still who would literally say to me, if you're a real man, you play a twin reverb and a Telecaster with a cable and nothing else. And I would go like, really? I guess I'm not a real man, because I don't play a Telecaster, I don't play a twin reverb, I play a Les Paul through a Marshall, and I'm working here now. The idea of taking what were the blues amps and turning them into the hot rod amps, working with an engineer there named Matt Wilkins, who's still there. I mean, it's Matt Wilkins, not freaking Wilkins. I mean, this guy's made more money designing amps for other people than any 10 people. You know what I mean? So Matt and I just sat down and I said, look, this is the problem. This is what needs to happen. Let's fix it. And we went about it. And a couple of months later, I had a bill of materials that we had to work with. We had a serious cost constraint. They can only cost what they cost because but I did raise the price $250 from what the blues were. And, we kind of know what happened at that point, you know what I mean? So that was Bill, make it work and people will buy it. Make it fair and people will buy it. And that was Jim, that was Bill, that was the whole thing. Instead of saying, I got to hit $99 and I don't care if it's a piece of junk. It's like we would come up with stuff, well, we can't do 99, but we can do 129, and it's freaking great. And Bill would say, well, can you sell it? I said, yes, I can, sir. And he would go, well, then do it. Do it.
In looking at sort of the comparisons between Marshall and Fender, what would you say are fundamental differences between those two businesses?
The differences between Marshall and Fender were more financial, and business, more back room than front room. The desire, the passion of the people there, the whole kind of, why are we doing this between Marshall and Fender, there was no difference. The difference is that Jim owned the company 100% and it was a cash business. The Fender company that I worked for was heavily leveraged and there were other issues that came with that. Not necessarily bad, but it was something that we always had to think about, right? Mm-hmm. Jim could make his decisions, that's what I want to do. Great. We had other things to consider. They weren't obstacles. They didn't cause us to make bad decisions, but they were part of the decision-making process for sure.
So looking at both of those companies today, I mean, look, the industry's changed so much. I mean, manufacturing has changed. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't make everything in the United States anymore. You got to ship to overseas to compete. Mm-hmm. But those are two legendary brands that went through some difficult times trying to refine themselves. And let's face it, Marshall's put out some crap since, and Fender has too. Looking at them today, like, what's your kind of perception of where they're at today compared to the days when you were working there?
Companies like Marshall and Fender are in a difficult spot. They have this legacy, they have this history. And the trick is to kind of revere, right? To respect that legacy, but not live in it. And so many of the people, the fans, the super fans, want those companies to live in their past. And that's a problem, there's friction there. And these companies have to move ahead. When we did the Cyber Twin, the reason we did it, 1 year there was no such thing as Line 6, and then 3 years later it's a $36 million company. And the amplifier market had not grown by 1 cent. So that money was coming out of somebody's hide. It wasn't coming out of ours yet, but it was coming, right? Mm-hmm. And so we had to start a Manhattan project, like immediately, to create some digital stuff, hiring engineers, what have you, envisioning what the digital world of a Fender would be. And to pay for that, we had to come up with a product, which was the Cyber Twin. So the difficulty is, how do you stand on that legacy? How do you stand on the legacy that is your strength? And the source of your the awareness that people have of you, but how do you move forward at the same time while there are people on forums who saying it's like, well, Fender hasn't done anything worthwhile since 1965. It's a very, very tough thing.
Jim Marshall is no longer there. Leo Fender is no longer there. So they're brand names now. They're not, like you said, when you went to work at Marshall, Jim Marshall was there working hard and, driving the ship. And now it's just like, what would Jim have done? Listen, I know Marshall got into headphones and cell phones for a while. Someone was making some odd decisions there.
I think it would be fair to say that both Marshall and Fender kind of got lost or maybe carried away for a while. I think one more than the other, you figure it out, has found their way back a little bit. There's nothing wrong with t-shirts and cell phone covers and apparel, nothing wrong with that. I see no problem with it. The question is where does it sit in the firmament, and are you still making something that, you know, Eric Clapton could take and record the Blues Breakers album with? When that goes away, you have an issue. It's tough, you know, but I think they're finding their way back. You know, they're good people. I know the Fender guys, you know, most of them. They want to do right. And the things that they're up against, the realities of their world, are you know, that stuff weighs heavy. That's real stuff, you know?
I'm sure 50 years from now, you're not going to find a Marshall cell phone for worth $150,000, right?
I don't think there will be a Marshall cell phone worth $150,000.
It was something that had like 2 inputs on it, and we're trying to do something different, but anyways.
You got to remember, in the case of, you know, the Marshall cell phones and those Bluetooth amps and all that stuff, they don't make that stuff. That's all licensed business.
Licensed stuff, yeah, I know.
So, you know, it is what it is. It's okay. Again, in and of itself, it's not a problem. The question is what are you doing, you know?
Hey, what do you think of this video so far? If you're enjoying yourself, perhaps you'd consider clicking the like button. It really helps out this channel, and I really appreciate it. Of course, you can drop me a note in the comments, or even hit that subscribe button. All right, let's get back to the interview. You've had an illustrious career in the music industry, and you said how fortunate you feel. But a great perspective, and I'm sure there's a ton of gear lying around your house. You're also a father to a guitar player who's got an interesting career in his own right. How influential were you on his choices? Not to say necessarily musically. I mean, I'm a father. I've got 2 kids, and I have this saying I always say to them: carry the torch of rock and roll. I said, it's up to you guys. You know, if you guys don't carry it, I mean, there's a lot of temptation to do it the easy way. But you also don't want to be like your father necessarily during a very influential part of your life. But how much influence have you had on him in terms of his choices and, you know, the equipment that he likes, or has he rebelled in doing it his own way?
So yeah, I am known on Twitch as Toxic Dad Eternity. And that handle comes from the fact that my son, Jack, is Toxic X Eternity, star of Twitch, YouTube, and other places. He also has a band called Singularity. I gave Jack a couple of things. First of all, he's like the best musician I ever met. I mean, the guy blows my mind. When Jack was like 4 years old, I'm playing guitar, and he looks at me and says, "Dad, your guitar isn't right." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It's not right." I said, "Try and explain it to me, young man." He says, "The sound isn't right." Let me see. So I get a tuner out, and of course, you know, I'm a quarter step flat. I tune up, and I go, "Is it right now?" He goes, "Yeah, that's better." You know, so that's what I was dealing with. So I gave him some genetic material to work with. And I gave him the no choice of playing music. I was not his teacher. I got him a real teacher. Gave Jack a solid background in music. You know, up until he moved out, he would come home every day and walk past a pile of Marshalls and Gibsons and Fenders and stuff, and couldn't care less about them. They're not for him. He has no interest in them. He appreciates what they are. He thinks that it's cool that his dad has some cool stuff. But he's found his own way. He's his own man. He's an endorser of ESP, which is kind of funny because that was actually my first gig demoing guitars for ESP back in the day. He's an endorser of H&K amplifiers. And, you know, he's his own man. And we're super proud of him.
It goes to show it doesn't matter, right? He wanted to do his own thing, and I mean, it would have been so easy for him to just say, "Hey, there's a couple of great instruments. I'm on my way." But the fact that he did it his own way, and listen, I've checked out some of the stuff. He's doing really well, so that's great to hear.
Those instruments don't make the sound that he wants. End of story. Next.
So there's a real push to this all digital economy. I mean, you know. How does that affect a young player coming up? And what I mean by that is, I mean, it's a big question, but I know we've talked about this before, but I kind of think about, a young player coming up and, a lot of the choices that he has are handed to them. So in the digital world, I mean, presets and parameters and things like that. And there's a lot of shortcuts out there. There's just, even home recording, I mean, everything's done on a grid, and it's like, you got MIDI packs and sample packs, and there's just so much pressure or influence on young kids coming up that they can really, it's easy to do it instead of, just filtering out all of that stuff and focusing on what's really most important. I think that's learning how to play your instrument.
Yeah, that's what people used to say to me when I played an electric guitar, and the old Italian guy in the pizzeria would say that I wasn't a musician because I played an electric guitar. Next question.
But there's a bit of a difference though. Like I mean, obviously, amplifying an instrument to make it louder, but it certainly wasn't doing anything else for you, right? It wasn't playing.
No, there's no difference. You still have to have a thing. You still have to make something somebody wants. You still have to make music that touches people, and the computer can aid you with that, just like my electric guitar aided me. Or the drum machine that I bought, allowed me to make better demos in the late 80s. Jack has done albums, they record the drums in the studio, they do all the guitar sounds in their room, and Billie Eilish does a whole record in her bedroom, it's like that, it's freaking great. And she doesn't have to suck up to some record company jerk to try and get a deal and stuff. It's fantastic. It's better than it's ever been. I see my contemporaries wishing for the good old days of record companies. Are you freaking high? You out of your mind? Come on.
Now, think in terms of the guitar hero, though. I mean, when I think of a guitar hero, I think about the player. Yeah. I think about the guitar he's playing, and I think about the amp that he's playing through. Yeah. And I think all of the greatest guitar players of our era and the previous era, those three things were kind of synonymous with each other. Will we ever see a true guitar hero again?
Yeah, they're there now. They're just not playing stuff that you and I are listening to.
Well, what I mean is certainly, I'm not saying the players technically blow us away.
I'm talking about guitar heroes. So guitar heroes that touch people with their playing and their passion. Mm-hmm. It's just, we're not listening to these guys. So we think they're not there. Those trees are falling in the forest and we're not listening. Which doesn't make them not there.
What's what I'm kind of asking, because, I mean, like Eddie Van Halen is a perfect example. I mean, he influenced two generations of guitar players. I mean, he did something, he wasn't the first to put two hands on the fretboard.
Yeah, for sure.
But he did it in a way that no one else had done before and succeeded with it, and influenced the whole generation.
No doubt.
Certainly, and like I said, back to that initial question, that combination of the brilliant guitar player. He was a tweaker too. I mean, he was taking the guitars apart. I mean, his guitar, the Frankenstein guitar, is almost as legendary as he is. Yeah. Right. The big amplifiers he was playing through. I mean, the Variac and how he used to overdrive his Marshall and stuff like that was all part of the story.
Yeah, right? And most of that story.
And I think you put all those things together, created the legend that was Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah, most of that story is legend.
My question.
Most of that story is legend too, by the way. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's kind of my question, is that, I mean, there's great guitar players and then there's guitar legends. I mean, I can count probably on one hand the true...
Right, but again, who's writing the history? I'm going to keep pushing back on this. The reason you're saying that is because the people that are writing the things that you read, that I read, that's what they say.
Yeah.
Nobody's writing about these other guys, right, in places that we see. We're not looking at it. The whole thing, it's not just the guitar guy, it's not just their godliness and their outsized influence as a persona, right? We don't see any of it, right? But it's there.
I mean, listen, a lot of the greats were there early. They wrote the script, right? And they happened to be they were successful at that time. I mean, we think about Jimi Hendrix. I mean, my goodness. I mean, he was only in the public eye for 4 or 5 years.
For a moment.
And he's never left. The
Beatles, they didn't exist for 10 years.
Yeah. So part of that legend, being like, I mean, George Martin was as critical to the Beatles as John Lennon's vocals were, right? I mean,
could be, yeah.
There's a lot to that story that people don't.
We weren't there,
Right. But it's sort of the question, like, would Jimmy Page have become Jimmy Page if he was noodling on a Kemper, right? Who knows?
These are the questions that have confounded mankind since the dawn of time.
So I have one last question for you. I think it would be a nice way to put a bow on all of this. If you had the ability to talk to yourself, you were just stepping out for the first time, we've heard your story.
Yeah.
Sitting where you are today, if you had a chance to talk to yourself just for 2 minutes, what would you say to yourself?
Relax, buddy. It's going to be really good. It's going to be good.
On that note, Ritchie, I want to thank you so very much for sharing your story with me today. I had an absolute blast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man.
Well, that concludes my interview with Ritchie Fliegler. I want to thank Ritchie so much for his time and sharing those wonderful stories with us. We'd love to know what you thought about this video. That's what the comment section is for. If you want to support this channel, like, subscribe, and ring that bell. That's the easiest way. I've also got links in the description, offers, I've got affiliate links, and I'm on Patreon if you want to do a deeper dive with me. But the most important thing is to check out another video. I've got a couple of options right here, and I certainly hope I'm going to see you again soon.